walk, you're getting coffees, you're supporting the locals, and then you got your
Yeah, it's
bubble.
like it was really good. So we could actually go up to our local and buy a coffee from those guys up there, which is just awesome to be able to support them. And we've got a park that's literally 5 minutes drive from my house that we haven't been to over the last 5 weeks. So we can go and do that. So it was yeah, it was pretty good.
Can I also say, I am ridiculously well impressed with the symmetrical framing of what you have got going on there. It
So
is perfect. It is as an so. There's a reason why I roll exactly like this is because I
yeah,
need it perfectly symmetrical. If shit's not perfect like right now, see, I'm off. I'm off, and I'm back on. If
but you know
it's
what?
not
Like,
tight, I lose it.
so we've been making a whole lot of content for parents, but if you look at the back there, there are there are there are two. I used to have. There's kind of two things on one side. Oh God, I've got my thing. So two things on one side and one thing on the other side. That's been disturbing for some people. And at the very beginning, I had two little silver things on one side and one on the other side, and that was just freaking some people out. So I swapped out one for a pot plant, and that seems to have balanced it up for people.
No, it's a thing. I'm always, like my eye can see. I could look at a design and I could tell if something's off by like two or three pixels, and just with them
Yeah,
like so. For starters, well done. So obviously, you've got to. Maybe I'll start here. Over the last while, you've got to see lots of sides of New Zealand, New
yeah.
Zealanders, culture, community, commerce, and really what it's become clear with COVID is it's become a unifying moment where culture, commerce, and community have all been together with the same thing on the same page. How have you seen, I guess, the culture or vibe or the DNA of New Zealand potentially change over this last 6 weeks?
I think it's funny. I was thinking about that. Like, I'm in a fairly. I've been really lucky over the last few years in that I've got to spend basically my life is just traveling around the country talking to interesting people. So whether that's doing the kind of, the speaking gigs or the tele gigs, and I've always kind of had this belief. I've always been amazed at us as a country. And, you'll turn up to like we turn up to film something and it's a shed. And then you go in the shed and there's wonders and miracles happening inside. So, and, I'm have been constantly kind of humbled and impressed by when you travel around the country talking to different organizations and companies, like there is a real concern for people and for looking after people and this idea of doing social good and for companies to look after the people who work from all that kind of stuff. And so what I think is happening now is I think like in the world before, it's easy to get cynical about people and to think that we're all just trapped by our devices and cynical and self-interested and all the rest of it.
Mm,
But actually, you look at what happens when the shit hits the fan.
mm,
People do what they do, right? Which is um, just little things like people putting teddy bears up on their windows for kids, messages on people's gates, the student army helping out, older people who can't go to the supermarket, the resurgence of interest in buying New Zealand made um, and kind of platforms for businesses here that are based here rather than the kind of the overseas things that we've just inherited and used because we were all just kind of it was easy and we were lazy. So I think there's a real, and I don't think it's xenophobia. Like, I don't think we're going to go all Donald Trump about this and want to close our borders and not talk to the rest of the world. I think what people are realizing is that in like this big global thing that we're in is really fragile. And so if your business is built on these extended supply chains and you're basing your what you do on I'll order it now, I'll get it in a week or 2 weeks, and that kind of stuff, people are getting, no, that's really dangerous. Like, this has
mm.
happened now, it could happen again. And I think there was a real passion for supporting local industries. And I think, but in a good way, not in this,
Mm.
xenophobic, racist, the world's evil way. I think in a positive way, we're kind of looking at, okay, so what can we do to support our own businesses and our own economy?
Yeah, the organic kind of natural pulls of passion and care for that kind of hyper local resiliency, or to really back. It's not even back in the underdog. It's genuinely like everyone can feel the impact that it has had on everyone else, and everyone can see the impact that it is having on everyone else. And it's
Yeah.
almost in a weird way. Do you think it's kind of empowering every dollar to go, and there's a filter that's come on top of it to then check? do I do this or that? And there's almost this moral and ethical, I don't know if it's a moral and ethical compass is the right word, but maybe like maybe it's a care compass. Let's call it a care compass. Maybe there's this new kind of little care filter of like, do I, spend the dollars for a cheaper overseas thing, or do I really care and value that thing which builds to ourself? Do you think in a weird way maybe New Zealanders have become more, this will forever change the psyche of how they choose to spend every dollar?
I hope so. I kind of stopped reading opinion pieces because they were just making me feel depressed. But one of the ones they just were. I just like one of my freak out.
Yeah.
I know. I've only had about 2 sort of freak outs, and the biggest one was kind of I read some opinion piece about what was going to happen to us, and they used words like the depression, and it's like, oh, Jesus. So I just stopped at that point. But I did read one that was really impactful. And it was a bloke talking about how he's afraid, but the thing that he was afraid of is not coronavirus and it's not the economic impact. What he's afraid of is that this thing will happen and we'll go through all of the suffering and sacrifice, and then we'll just rebuild the old world that we had before. That's
copy
probably
paste 2.0. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to rebuild that world. I don't think it was good I don't think it was fair, and I don't think it was equitable. And what I hope is that as more of the people as we've all been forced into this position of suddenly needing a safety net and needing to depend on our neighbours and needing to depend on our government, that we kind of start thinking, actually, there's some really good things about living in a country where you have, there's a collective looking after of everyone. And so, maybe taxes aren't super evil. Yeah. I thought it was freaking hilarious when the taxpayers union took up the wage subsidy. So the very people who said we will never take taxpayers' money, what they really meant was, when we don't need it, we won't take up taxpayers' money, but now that we need it, it's different, and so therefore we will. But that's different, and it's those people over there have been taken up for ages. They're still bad people. I thought that was freaking hilarious.
There's been quite a few Muppet moves that will get unwind and exposed over this next little bit.
Yeah.
From as simple as, comms with staff to pay out things gone wrong to just, leases with landlords to just, there's just so many different, like I was saying before, the butterfly effect of the tentacles of this thing going to every part of everyone's life at every different thing. It's been quite, I don't know, inspiring is definitely not the word, but definitely eye-opening to maybe show the average and really prove to the average, Kiwi, the effects that things have, how everything affects everything. The balance of, that flipping Lion King shit, the balance of life, of how all these bits move around the circle of life. Yeah. It's so true,
Yeah. Well, and it's like, and that whole thing has just made us reevaluate everything, so supermarket workers, the people that everybody just ignored, are now seen as being heroic frontline workers, and we're getting, they, for the first time, you look at people in supermarkets and you go, oh, you actually do this really important thing, you keep us fed, you make sure there's
thank you food, thank you. Yeah,
it's like that's a good thing. Perhaps we'll look at valuing how we value roles and positions. So how do we value teachers and how much we pay them? How do we value scientists? We've kind of valued some people very highly. Probably everybody knows Susie Wiles now, and they may know maybe another couple of people, but before this, most people wouldn't have known the name of a single scientist in this country. And we're a country rich in science and scientists and people doing all kinds of amazing stuff.
I was talking to Michelle Dickinson about this, and we were talking about if only scientists had the same exposure as some of this mainstream media, for those that were educated, that could actually have a voice that was loud, that have impact, instead of those that almost won by default because they had the loudest megaphone. Yeah. It's like, make the heroes out of it,
Yeah, and Michelle's one of those standout scientists, right? I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people just think she's really great. But I think a lot of people, particularly people who just see some of her social media stuff, will just think she's just a science communicator, not this actually really accomplished, very clever actual scientist.
Weapon. She is a weapon.
She is. And and so there are these people in our country who are really good at doing this stuff, and like what an amazing role model people like her and Susie Wilds are, and and everyone loves Ashley now. It's like
Yep.
public health is a kind of a thing. So I've always kind of thought it's a bit shameful that we don't value scientists as much as we value sports players. I mean, sports is great, and I know that people work incredibly hard and they have skills and stuff to get top of the fields, but also our scientists, these people, they're an important part of what we do.
Yeah, I've always had this frustration piece thinking about, the young bucks. Who are the heroes that sprinkle the breadcrumbs of positivity that helps affect their lives? And when I was a young buck, it was Michael Jordan and Dr. Dre. It was sports and hip hop, and then if you fast forward thing, it's still sports and hip hop. The average young buck isn't really looking up to the John Olomus of business or the Michael Jordan and Dr. Dre's of entrepreneurship and tech
Yeah,
and whatever. And
yeah,
I think that we've had a first wave of, I remember when it's the big, nurses and teachers deserve more. It's like 100%, my wife's a nurse, 100%. But this has definitely widened that gap to just, we have more heroes than we realize. And I think this is a
yeah.
good moment to actually just maybe change the optics of what you feel is important or not. But I really would like more people of actual education to have bigger platforms, and so we can just shut up and listen to those who actually know what's up. Because we were talking to Melissa Clark Reynolds the other day, and she just went on this random tangent, and it was so good. She goes, I'm flipping sick of these tech bros trying to say, oh, I reckon that we should. And I was just like, Melissa is so good. But she's right. Like
Yeah.
let's say, I'm not saying we, like, we're not scientists. We don't know this crazy tech shit. Flippin' give the flippin' biggest megaphone to the smartest humans, not those that win by default.
Yeah.
I think I really hope it changes. That we need to get better PR for those that actually know the smart shit which we don't know. It's going to make the world safer, I think.
And some of it, like scientists also struggle a bit with thinking that anyone's interested in what they do. Because I remember a couple of years ago, I went to this camp, and it was for scientists going down to the ice the next season, and it was talking about communications and media stuff. And I talked with this woman for 25 minutes who basically was this Tomb Raider of the Antarctic. Like, she'd spent 20 years on the Ross Ice Shelf, and she was just, my God, she was interesting. And then at the end of it, she said, but I'm not very good at the science communication stuff. And I literally just went, what the fuck? Like, seriously? Like, and I think so part of it is, I think it is a difficult thing to do, and it's a hard thing to kind of get used to the media stuff and talking to people, and but they just have to, like, their passion for what they do, that's the interesting bit. Like, we've sat in rooms talking to scientists, and you hook into the stuff they're passionate about. It's like super interesting. Like the guy in the Antarctic, when we were down there years ago, we were in this hut. It was like a scene out of Shackleton, Scott's, diary. We were in this hut in the middle of the dry valleys, and like scientists were doing science, and some of them were cooking. And I thought, God, all you need now is literally for someone to come in and show you a sample they just found. And at that precise moment, this German bloke, he came over and said, I've just found this moss. Would you like to see this moss? It is 10 cells on your... And I'm going, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, the wave of, when I was a young buck, entrepreneurship or startup or hustle was kind of looked down upon if you didn't get, A's in bursary and school C and all that shit, because I failed high school, failed school C, all that. But you think the same wave's going to happen now with science. It was like, it's going to be the dope. She's like, bro, you're in science? All right, you're saving lives, you're saving the flipping world. And I think it's going to be net a good moment for education to get more spotlight on the good, I feel. So net, I think it will hopefully be good.
Yeah, and I think there will be more focus on entrepreneurship and the tech stuff, because tech, it doesn't have borders. Like, you don't have to do that kind of stuff, technology and science. But when that kind of all that combines in that little entrepreneurial perfect storm of amazingness, that's where we can do stuff that changes the world. I mean, I do think also that we that kind of we are looking at. We kind of need to be kinder to each other when we're talking about things. Like dairy farmers have been pummeled for a long time. Not so much anymore. Like we're all pretty happy we've got a dairy industry right now, you know.
Yeah,
And yes, it still has problems, and yes, there's still there's still issues there. But it just feels like for a long time it's been about fault finding and finger pointing and blaming and that kind of stuff. It's like, well, no, let's find ways to make the best of what we've got and to build on that, and not to kind of beat people up for the stuff that they do.
Yeah, the point on building on it, right? You were saying before a lot of what we had was broken. What do you think the biggest parts, if you're an alien looking at New Zealand pre-COVID PC, what parts were really broken that you think we have a chance to potentially fix or address now properly?
I mean, I think capitalism
That
was
old chestnut.
that old chestnut. You know, it's like all I've done. It feels like all I've done for my entire career has been working with the dregs of the offcasts of, you know, the human cost of capitalism. And yes, capitalism has done some good things for the world and that model and blah blah. And I remember having a long debate with an arch neoliberalist capitalist who I think probably has a picture of Ayn Rand tattooed on his ankle.
Sounds fun. Sounds fun.
Yeah.
Invite him to Christmas. Awesome.
And it's like, and yes, it has lifted people out of poverty. I don't think far enough. And I think we can look at how that model has evolved. And it hasn't been useful. So I think fundamentally it's about rethinking how we share the wealth and the gains of the things that we do. You know, is there a fairer, better way to share those resources so that everybody can actually live a decent life? You know, when we have people working 70 hours a week and still having to go and get food parcels to feed their kids, that's fucked up. That should not be a thing. And so what I hope is that we will look at how we do things, and consumers are going to they'll really start to value the companies who are fair and who pay things like the living wage. And yeah, there are tough times for a lot of businesses at the moment, but we just can't rebuild this thing that we had before. We have to try to think of ways to rebuild every aspect of our economy so we can cope with these things when they happen in the future. So we've got more robust businesses in terms of that whole supply chain stuff, so that we can share resources more equally. Like I'm actually really optimistic for young people, probably for the first time forever, because I think maybe you guys have got a shot. Maybe
the tree's been shaken enough, but the difference of 10 years ago to now is now everything is tech, but now you've got these new tech leaders which are stepping up to the plate that are, I'm calling it the squeeze. I don't know if other people have said it, but it's the squeeze of, I've said it a few times, the 3s and 4s are becoming the 1s and 2s, where that young buck, piss off, go get me a coffee person from 10 years ago is now the marketing manager or the GM or the MD or the young CEO. And that squeeze is like the 36 to 42, where they're old enough that they've done enough shit that they're trusted to be in the room with credibility and have weight, but they're still young enough to know what's up. And I'm at the bottom of the squeeze. So I'm only 34. So the bottom of the squeeze is like, my homies are starting to get in those circles now. But that's where I think is really interesting, to your point, is because if the new leaders are the new 1s and 2s, and they're instinctually driven around, I guess maybe not, I'm not saying profit is obviously important for businesses, but there's more to, it's very clear that with their world and their view, it's not, let's wear a flipping 3-piece, work flipping 20 hours a day, drive to the bottom and stuff you, this is how it's done, or piss off type thing. I think that leadership's not only hopefully dead, but it really, even through this thing, I feel that there's going to be a new wave of leadership that's going to be given more reins to help deal with this new future that we're building. And that's where I think is the squeeze is going to get interesting in the next 12 months. I think.
Yeah, it's a more empathetic kind of socially grounded leadership. And the thing that I guess the biggest thing that I've learned over the last 10 years of making documentaries and talking all over the place is that it's good business to do good. Like, even if you're a total psychopath and you have no feeling for other human beings, just fake being a decent human being and be, you know what I mean? Like it is really good business. They're not mutually exclusive. It's not some, indulgence that's going to be bad for your company. You look at what people are doing right now, where the movement is. There was a Facebook group set up to buy locally made product. It got something like 170,000 people signing up in about 4 days. There's a company called Eat Local NZ, which are pushing themselves, and I'm championing them because it's like, I think you pick one battle you can help with, and for me it's this. They're trying to challenge the Uber Eats model, and just a wave of people have signed up, and a wave of businesses have signed up that wouldn't have been possible before. So from a kind of where the country's head and heart is at, that's where we're at. If I was a business, I'd be thinking about, how do you position yourself so that people can see the value that you add. And to be honest, it's any business right now. Like you want to support anything, like you drive along, you see there's a bakery, I'd go and buy a loaf of bread. I don't even know it. Our local cafe, we've got into the habit of having coffees at home, right? And just, so we used to go out in the morning, have a coffee, and then come home and I start doing some work. We've sort of got into the habit of doing it at home, and we talked about it and thought, well, we could just keep doing that. We've actually saved a lot of money from having coffees at home. But if we all do that, we're buggered. And those people at the cafe, I like them. I've known them for a couple of years now. And so it's about where you can, you support and help people. So even though for us, it kind of makes sense not to do that anymore, we're going to keep doing it because that's how we all do better. It's like, I think there is a huge opportunity now for us just to refocus and recalibrate the whole ball game.
It almost feels, to your point, Nigel, it's around, empathy almost has its own momentum now. Like goodwill has momentum, and maybe selfishly for businesses, or if you're thinking more for the commercial head on, it's like, okay, how can you capitalize off this moment of empathy and care for others to help make your business not just make transactions now, but actually create proper engaged relationships to create that glue to then move forward? Because if you go business as usual, and let's say you've got those right intents, and you go in and then you get shit service and they don't care and it's rushed and blah blah blah, then you can be like, ugh, stuff this. Like, I came here to help you guys, and you guys being dicks, piss off. That there's going to be this funky psychological, I guess, tango that's going to happen between like commerce and community over this next little bit. Those threads are going to weave quite sporadically.
And I think it's okay. Like, there's this whole thing about, and it's a narrative that's been around for a long time. It's like, that brand, they're only doing that because it's good for the brand, it's good for blah. You can have two things that are true. You can do something that is a good thing to do, which is also good for your brand or organization or company, and they're not mutually exclusive. They don't cancel each other out. You can do good things that have another benefit, and those two things are both still true. I think it's kind of the thinking that we have to get past. Like, no, they're just doing that because, Well, yeah, there's a value to that company of doing that, but actually they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Overwhelmingly, my experience with companies around New Zealand has been they actually just want to do the right thing. They genuinely want to help the people who work for them to invest and develop their well-being. They are genuinely interested in building communities. And so we kind of have to get past, I think, as a country, some of our cynicism and just accept the fact that, you can do a good thing that's also good for your company. And we have to be, I think, forgiving of mistakes, and we have to, because there's a whole bunch of things that are going to start now, and they're not going to get it right. There will be problems and things will go wrong. But you just have to hang in there. You kind of have to commit. Like, if I'd gone up to our local cafe, and it took 40 minutes for a coffee, and it was cold because it didn't. It was, they were great. But if it did, I'd still go back, because it's like, well, that's what you do. That's what we all have to keep doing.
Yeah, it's almost that filter of when your intent, I call it, intent trumps all. When you get so much more leeway if they know what your intent is, even though the execution could be off. And it's become very clear that through COVID and as we move from 4 to 3 to 2 to hopefully the new normal for a new New Zealand, that we just don't forget that with each other. And I don't think we will, because it's been so entrenched with what this has meant for every part of society,
Yeah.
that I feel that the intent is pretty clear, that even if everyone throws, a million just straight just bricks for this next year or two to try, at least if I've been trying, they know what the intent is. And I think that is net probably a good thing for Kiwis.
Yeah, and I think what will happen in weeks and months ahead now is there will be lots of second guessing, and particularly how the government's response to COVID and how we could have done this and we should have done that. That stuff is going to start up, I think, a lot. So I think we have to be careful to kind of just build on the good stuff that we've done, and that's the only way that we're going to salvage, a different kind of New Zealand and to help more businesses, is to just focus on being positive. And that's what the best organizations, the best teams I've ever been in. There's no freaking blaming and crap. It's just like, okay, shit happened.
Next.
Let's learn from it. Let's move on, and mistakes are good, right? And it's a trite old thing, but it bloody is. Like, I've never learned anything from the things that have gone well. I've learned stuff from the shit that's gone catastrophically wrong, and then you lift your game. So, that's the kind of, as a country, that's the kind of team culture that we need to try and build. The same thing that's got us through these last 4 or 5 weeks. If we can keep that going and find a way to keep that momentum going, we're going to be in a pretty good place in 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
I've always had this idea or thought around, moment to movement, like mass execution comes from mass education, which comes from mass awareness, which comes from mass inspiration. And then it's like, okay, well, we've had a moment. Cool. We're all in the Kool-Aid of action and change and better New Zealand and hyperlocal resiliency and look out for each other and care. How do you strategically put all these little pieces continuous, whether it be from, the New Zealand police with their social with a whole bunch of teddy bears and creating that, or comms with the local, just whatever this thing is, how do we take a strategic approach to make sure that this moment becomes a movement? Because the upside is so incredibly massive if we get it right, not only for New Zealand, for each other's, but as a statement to the world, with a halo effect, with the magnet of new commercial opportunity. There's so much at stake potentially after this than there was before this, I feel, for the world. If you were talking about before about, things not being fair and how you do it, what do you think a new version of fair could look like for this new New Zealand? If you like to sprinkle a little ladder dust over it, what does that look like in your head?
Well, I think that what we'd do is we would look at kind of every aspect of our economy, and we would think, okay, so what makes us stronger and more independent? What are the and how do we take people and invest in training and education? So we're doing a lot of infrastructure projects, which are great, and that will get people back to work. But how can we also upskill and train people? People who at the moment may not have the skills and knowledge that they need, but could retrain and take on other roles. So I would be looking really strongly at how we invest in training. I would be looking at that idea of, it's interesting. So things like a universal basic income used to be just some flouncy idea that, blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, it's like now most of us have been on a universal basic income for a little bit. And so so people need to say, so what's the impact of me of taking the wage subsidy? Has it made me lazy? Has it made me think this is great? If I could just do this forever, I would. Or has it just removed the stress of trying to survive to a limited extent, which then frees you up to try to think about the stuff that you're doing next? So I think we need to rethink the whole system. A wealth tax. What about that? What about this idea of? And you know what? It's like we interviewed a guy. I won't say who, out of fairness, years ago. Who was
Bob? Bob,
not that one.
I know. Okay, we'll call him Steve. There you go, Steve.
So we interviewed Steve, and Steve is part of basically this family dynasty, and they built a very successful company. And his take was, he said it was a nonsense to suggest that wealthy people would leave New Zealand if you changed the tax system, because he said he wouldn't. He chooses to live there because it's a good place for his family, and he doesn't want his children and grandchildren to live in a gated community. He absolutely believes that he said, I'm not okay until everyone is okay, and that's how we need to look at things. If rather than just kicking a whole bunch of people, when I worked in child, youth and family and youth justice for years, right? And some of those kids who basically couldn't do the school system and ended up flying out the side of it and in all sorts of trouble, man, there were some smart kids there. I won't say how, but there was a 14-year-old that I talked to once who basically worked out an algorithm to escape from police dogs. I've never told it publicly. It's very, very clever. And this was a kid who had been biffed out of school.
Wait a second. I think I know the same kid, and he could. Dude, we'll talk about it after. I met that kid.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
It's to do with your strategy. He had a strategy that was a very simple algorithm, but it was genius.
With the fences.
Yeah.
Yes.
You met the same kid.
Yeah, I met the same kid.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay.
So
for another day. But yes, yeah.
They're just really, really smart kids. The problem is they're often they're dealing with trauma, and they're dealing with neglect, and they're dealing with growing up in a shitty home, and they're dealing with stuff not going right for them, and generations of bad stuff happening. If you grew up in a shitty, damp, cold place, basically living in poverty, it's a freaking nonsense that we all have the same opportunities. Every time I hear someone say, the great thing about New Zealand is it's a level playing field and we all have it's like, fuck off, we do. Like, clearly,
piss off, man. No.
I know, it's like we don't. If we did, Jesus, imagine what we could do as a country if we did. Like, imagine if we could harness the creativity and the smart people who just get biffed to the curb. So that's what I would be focusing on doing. I think, how do we make the most of the resource that we've got, rather than just selectively making the most of small populations of people? How do we make the most of everyone? Sometimes I do these talks on the psychology of success, right? And I always start off by saying, if you want to be successful, the easiest way is to join the right club. And if you're in the right club, it's so much easier. And I said, I am in the best fucking club in the world. I'm a white middle-class man. If you've got any options, join that club because it's just so much easier.
It's like the alumni effect in the States. It's the same thing. It's a club.
Yeah. And it's like the people who I think anyone who looks and is like me, who thinks they got there just because of their own innate genius and blah, blah. No, you didn't. I mean, I grew up in a working class home, but I had a good mum and dad who loved and looked after me, and at the time could afford to do that. And then I got into university, and because and it's not being a woke, I hate that woke shit. It's just reality. It's just simple reality.
I get, yep.
So my
people
thing
don't see that though. They don't. The lenses don't see that if they don't. If they've only seen that one way, that's how they feel it is for others. Until you've experienced what that's like on the other side, to then experience it from others.
And that's my hope, that as more people have been pushed into that position of their lifestyle being threatened, and their income and their homes being threatened, that if nobody wants that to happen to anyone. But if what comes from that is a greater understanding and empathy for the reality of people who've been living that life and worse for years, then I think we're in a good place. We have massive amounts of capacity and talent and enthusiasm that we just ignore, and we just don't. We interviewed this kid. I could tell you endless stories of these amazing young people, but that would be my thing. I think we need to try to figure out ways as a country to use to lift everybody up, because if we do that as a country, my goodness.
Yeah, the challenge of, and it's weird because it takes a different mindset of those in power or influence, or those that can have the levers to pull, to open the gates for those that don't look like them, roll like them, talk like them, act like them, just anything like that. It's such a tough. I broke through, but it was because my mental headspace is, I'm a nut job. But the many crew that are just like me would never even fathom being able to get in the room or to do whatever. The thing that sucks for me is when I then talk to the same for yourself, you go talk to them and you just hear them talk with the ideas and the thinking. You're like, man, you could drop that shit into a corporate right now and it'd be just like next level. So it's like, how do you,
Yeah.
that crossover, how do you bridge the gap between it's not even the have nots, the haves. Like, a perfect example is Ian Taylor, right? So we had him on the show a little bit ago. He's down in Dunners, obviously doing his
Yeah.
thing. His whole crew is like, look, everyone's on board. Don't stress about anything. We're good to the end of the year. Just go nuts. He goes, but until now in December, I want you to use this time to finally be able to create all that crazy shit which you never had time for, and you have my full blessing to go nuts. See
He's
you in December.
fantastic, that guy.
It's like,
He's so, yeah.
and the ninja shit of it is, when you talk to outside of being a good bastard, keeping his team on board, yada yada yada. It's actually the fact of like, no, you're techless, you're tech, which means you're weightless, you're global, and you're scalable. So if you get one thing that pops, the IP goes flipping everywhere. So then
Yeah.
selfishly, it's the same thing you're talking about, win-win. It's he's been a good bastard to help them as humans, but then they, as a byproduct, are gonna create some shit that is going to be so amazing and impactful that then goes to the flippin' world that gets commercialized 1,000 times more than another tree that gets cut once and is gone. Like I want that. I want that thinking to change for New Zealand. I
Well,
feel.
and that sort of Ian Taylor like thinking is completely contrary to what normal thinking would suggest. Like, ironically, the book that I've been suggesting to all of the organizations I've been talking to is this really, really old one, Edward de Bono, Lateral Thinking. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's so dry. It's like eating Wheat Bix without milk. Like, it's really freaking boring. It's a terribly dull book, but the ideas in this book are profoundly useful. If I think back over my entire life, my entire career, there was before I read this book and after I read this book. And what I like about lateral thinking is it's like if the same old isn't working, you can't just sit around on a beanbag and wait for some moment of inspiration to come. There are some deliberate strategies that you can use to change your thinking about a thing. And I've used over the years the de Bono stuff much more than any of my clinical training, because mostly I'm dealing with, when I was doing a lot of child youth and family work, oranga tamariki work, it was like the situation was impossible and there was no solution and no one could work out a way forward. One of the simplest things you can do if you have a business and you have a problem, just do this. I've done this so many times, and usually it produces a result. So you have a problem and you think, this is impossible, we can't solve it. Literally what I would do, and it's a de Bono technique, I would just write all of the assumptions that I'm making about the problem down on a bit of paper, every single assumption I can think of, and then you go through and you either prove or disprove those assumptions. And so you end up with a very small list of things that you don't know if they're true or not. And usually somewhere in that assumption, there is something that's a solution. So it's like, it's a simple technique. And Ian Taylor's thinking is very lateral thinking. It's like, in the middle of all of this, rather than saying, right, finish the work that you're doing, or we're going to cut down and let's just focus on the things that are paying the bills, he goes, go crazy, like build crazy, mad stuff. We're going to pay you for the rest of the year to build stuff which may go nowhere. That sort of thinking.
And
that's not
to have the freedom and empowerment from leadership above to let the employees feel safe to go nuts and have any fallback on it. That's the shit. Like when you can do that, and to the Bono thing of the lateral thinking is, like right now entire verticals are just being demolished and dismantled and a whole much crazy shit. Everyone's need to go these crazy different ways of thought process to, like, how do you retake and redeploy skill sets of human capital in businesses to different verticals? How do you do just different models of what bricks and mortar infrastructure, yada yada yada. And we had Nikhil Ravishankar on the show last week, who's the chief digital officer at Vector, and we were talking about some of the crazy stuff that he had to kind of work through with the scenario planning, and we then talked about each time there's this gnarly problem, the way that it has been done and addressed is always broken at this point because everything's stuffed anyway. So then the question is, how do you create that empowerment? And what we were talking about, I call it ninja moves, right? Like, what's the crazy ninja move that you can just flip and go Hail Mary gnarly shit? But then the next bit was, well, how do you create an environment virtually through culture with communication to all your staff and employees to be able to have that bravery to then go outside? And I gave the analogy around John Kirwan for mental health. I said, John Kirwan was perfect for mental health because he created the Trojan horse that became the vehicle for everyone to talk about the thing without talking about the thing. And it says, how do you brand that? So then we brought it down to a question, and we were just talking shit online. We're going through it, and I said, okay, what if the question was then, what could MacGyver do?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
it changed the framework. So then the idea is you've put MacGyver as the, the dude could, make a flippant airplane out of shoestrings. But why it was amazing, because everyone got that analogy, but it created a safe space for ideas for people
yeah,
within the
yeah,
organization to say, oh, well, MacGyver could ... and they're like the Trojan horse is there. And if you
yeah.
brand that the same we were talking about, we said, holy shit, actually the reality of what's going to happen is, if agile thinking came through, it's a new hot thing for corporate, like, cool, get that. I think this pre-corona PC, AC, after corona methodology for business things, by even branding up these things around ninja moves and what could MacGyver do, it will open that thinking from beneath to come up. And I think hopefully that could help try and make businesses better, I feel.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have to change our thinking about thinking. Like if you're approaching your organization, your business with the same thinking as before, then that's not going to help. You need that sort of lateral thinking, the ninja moves, the MacGyver thinking to get you outside of those usual things. And it's been astounding to me over the years how if you just apply some simple principles so that you kind of force your brain to operate in a different way. And it is things like, the MacGyver move. Because what happens, and De Bono talks about this a lot, we become, our ideas, we take very personally, they're us. And so if someone criticizes the way that we do things, people are threatened by that and they think it's bad. And one of the things I've said to organizations for years is if some new kid comes into your office and starts criticizing things and you get upset about that, the problem is not the kid. The problem is you. We've always, and in every team I've ever been in, one of the things I've worked really, really hard at is there is no preciousness. Everybody gets to criticize everything. If you can find a hole, then poke a stick in it and just keep poking it until the thing falls apart. And so, I've always tried to work really hard so that everybody feels like they can criticize, they can second guess. In our production company, we have production assistants. We show them cuts of the show and ask them what they think. And if they didn't like stuff, there's nothing more depressing when you come up with a cool idea and you think it's awesome. And then you show it to your 24-year-old production assistant who goes, eh. And it's like, if you're an arrogant person, you would just discount their opinion. But it's like, oh, you know what I mean? It's like, so it is that stuff about you have to find a way to divorce your personal investment in your ideas and your processes and step aside from all of that. You need to encourage different people to come in. I remember years ago in a therapy agency that I worked in, they were having problems with kids behaving in the waiting room. And I said, well, let's get some hairdressers in and ask them how they control kids in the waiting room. And then I said, no one did that. And then I said, why don't we get the top real estate person in the country to come in and talk to us about sales? Because we were in sales. We were selling families ideas, but people couldn't get their heads around that. It's like, no, we do therapy. It's like, no, you don't. You're salespeople. You're trying to sell someone an idea. Why can't we get someone who's really good at sales? I've learned more from salespeople. They know stuff about how to influence people. And so it's that cross-fertilization of stuff. It's about stepping back from your ideas. It's about having really simple strategies. So maybe you sit down with your teams and you do the MacGyver thing. Another simple one is I used to call it De Bono calls it opposites, but I used to call it the Costanza effect. So did you ever watch Seinfeld?
No, I was more into Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
So you were, okay. So Seinfeld, back in the day, which was 100 million years ago, there was this guy called George Costanza, and his life was falling apart, right? And he had this insight, like he'd lost his job, he was living with his parents, he didn't have a girlfriend, and he said, you know what? Every decision that I make is wrong. I should just do the opposite of what I think is the right thing to do. And he started doing that, and then his life turned out really well. And so then I would use that thing when people were trying to solve clinical cases and in organizations as well. It's like, so here's your problem. What's the opposite of what you would do? What's the thing that you would do that would end up destroying everything and get you in the papers and be like, just do the opposite of common sense. And it's not that you would literally do the opposite, but it provokes your thinking. It takes you from where you were to something else. And then you can look at this big pile of ridiculous opposite ideas and there's somewhere in there. And this is, I think, the single most important thing for businesses and organizations to do now, to find ways to challenge your thinking about the processes. Because as you say, all that vertical stuff has been disrupted. Systems have been disrupted. Everything's been disrupted. So the same old thinking probably won't work. They need different strategies and ways to provoke those more lateral, ninja-like responses to thinking.
Yeah, and obviously I'm a sports guy. It just comes back to these new leaders. It's just offense or defense. They'll either go into the shell, put the handbrakes up, stuff this, and then there's going to be the offense crew of like, let's change it up, let's go, boom, boom, boom. And I actually think at a leadership level over the next 12, 18 months, there's going to be crazy leadership directional choices of offense or defense for how it was done business as usual 2.0, or let's actually build the new. So when you look at the future now, what gets you most excited about this sort of new New Zealand that we're going into? How do you think that if we were to go on, obviously on defense would be copy paste, same shit 2.0, we get gutted and we waste this opportunity. Going on offense, what do you get most excited about?
I think for me, it's this global thing. Like every person I speak to gets it. Everybody wants it. And so I've had conversations just at 2 meter distances from people, just as I'm out walking my dog around the streets, with people that we've never stopped and talked to each other before. And everyone is saying the same things. We have to think differently. We have to do stuff differently. Buying my coffee today, there was a bloke standing outside. We had this exact same conversation. So I think there's a momentum. I think there's an appetite. I think people want to work really hard to try to save as many New Zealand businesses as we can, because they're our neighbours and our friends and our family. And so I'm just really optimistic, because I think something has happened to our psyche as a country that is really significant, and there is a big momentum out there. It's like it's just swirling around looking for stuff to do. 170,000 people on the Sell New Zealand Facebook page. Over 100,000 people have signed up to the Eat Local NZ stuff. 600 businesses, venues signed up within a few days. So there is a huge, I think, appetite and momentum. And do you know what, really, the thing, every time I get depressed about things and I feel a bit grim, and so then I go out for a walk, because that's how I kind of deal with that kind of stuff. Really it is. It's the little bears. And this might sound simplistic and stupid, but I'll be thinking, Jesus, the economy and all these people losing businesses, and that's going to tank, and people aren't going to spend money. What the hell are we going to do? It's like, oh my God. Then you just see some people have hidden a little bear in their hedge, or there's one up on the window, or there's one in the car. And it's like, at one level, that's just a little bear. But what that is it's the humans wanting to connect and help other people. It's like, as we were all hunkered down, isolated and kind of cut off from each other, people were actively looking for whatever small thing they could do to make other people's lives a bit better. So, yes, these are grim times, and yes, there are people doing it hard, and I feel for them, and there are lots of businesses, I think, who will go through really tough times. But I think there is a momentum, and there's a will to do things differently, and that's based on this kind of culture that we have really surfed off for the last few weeks of kindness and looking out for each other. So I'm optimistic in a more profound way than I have been for a long time, that we can do something different, that maybe young people, maybe we can help build with them a different kind of world where they have a chance now.
Gets you hopeful for Kiwis, right? It changed the over resounding feel is we want it better and braver for a new Zealand. The danger is going to be how we can, kind of not even systemize, but put a bit more strategy into how we do that as a collective with a unity of purpose after this next bit. So
and it's people like you, who do. It's this kind of thing. It's like finding ways to keep that conversation going and putting it out there, and like that's why I think the thing that this is really important, and the people that you're talking to. That one of the wonderful things, of course, about all these platforms is there's a way to get that stuff out there. So we have to keep that momentum going. We have to keep talking. We have to not fall back on those old patterns. Uber Eats have just announced 0% fees, 100% of your tip goes to restaurants. That's an utterly cynical cynical move to try to kill off the local competition. What I think people should do is use it for a week until Eat Local NZ goes live, so they can still support local venues, and then dump them and go for a local thing. And I think people will do that because I think we want this different thing, and that's why it's important to keep having these sorts of conversations.
Love your work, brother, as usual. We always have good we always go on like nice tangents all over the place. It's great because I always see it as like little kernels of threads that you just plug through all of it. It's the way to do it though. You just got to have a bit of a different lens with how you see it. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time and just all you. I mean, everyone probably gives you a bunch of props, but the work that you've done and the conversations that you've started and the lives you've affected by, you talk about the dregs and the bottom. It's like, well, at the end of the day, if the streets don't mess with you, no one does. So, when you've been able to do that the right way and actually get it from the ground up, that's the best way things build. That has, it has longevity, and longevity brings legacy. So, big thanks to everything that you've done, bro. And yeah, stoked that you've made the time, bro. Always good to yarn and hang, man, for sure.
Well, to be honest, I actually feel like I've got far more from all of the people I've worked with than,
Mm,
like the richness that has brought to my life. Anything I'm doing now,
mm.
all of that comes from all of those experiences and the richness of those conversations, because those people, the people I've worked, they just open your eyes and they make you see stuff and they challenge your thinking. So I feel like I'm feeling very privileged to have done the things that I've done and to have the opportunity to speak to kids like the fence kid. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yep.
yeah.
We'll talk about we'll share the secrets another day.
Yeah.
Shut, brother. Love your work, man. I'll talk soon.
Thanks, Robert.
Later, Nigel. See ya. Peace. What a good bastard. Such a good human. Yeah, me and Nigel always have the good little banters about the ideas and stuff, and he's got to see so many different amazing parts of New Zealand, sad parts of New Zealand, and he's bringing a lot of those conversations to the forefront. So, big thank you, Mr. Nigel Latta, absolute champion. Good vibes, team. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of it, and I'll see you soon. Peace.